One of the coolest things you can do after finishing a Fromsoftware game is to ignore every patch note and play the game in its pre-release form. That means playing their games before Miyazaki and company concluded that having your health reduced to a 1/16th of its uncursed value was a bit much. Or before they found out the reason why Elden Ring became L2, then Ring. Thank you for that, Rivers of Blood. Or how you can fire a cannon as fast as a machine gun. That one was never patched, by the way. I guess the apathy from Sony towards Bloodborne does have some benefits. Today, we're diving into Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, to show you a ton of lore and gameplay differences it had in its 1.0 version. Let's go! I'll start with a spicy one. Did you know that bosses were even more cheesable than they are now? 3 deathblows were patched in the current version. One being against the corrupt monk, which was a paradise for speedrunners, 15 seconds. 15 seconds was all we could spare to play with her first 2 health bars. And then, just keep throwing ashes to her face while hitting twice every time she stops to rub her eyes. Also, the centipede had to be moved. It was positioned too far to the right in the room, which meant that, with a little help from the stealth sugar, we could sneak behind it and backstab the cutie. Not that it helps a ton, the fight isn't considered this game's pinwheel because the Miss Noble is a thing, but still helpful to speed things up. Another mini-boss that needed some fixing is the Sakura Bull. Back then, doing a death blow from stealth didn't damage it for some reason. Pair this with how annoyingly strong the bulls were back then, and you've got a hell of a fun time ahead. Speaking of fun, the game was awkwardly comical at times, considering how the AI wasn't as polished prior to the patches. In fact, Ashina was quite the pacifist state. Their philosophy was no dueling, just hashing things out with a little dance. The little dudes just ate your katana slashes for days until they couldn't take them no more. The same for this snake eyes in the Ashina depths. Also, generals, soldiers, and ninjas loved running into a wall, be it real or invisible. Not even puppeteered enemies wanted to do the fighting anymore. They would never aggro onto whoever you're dueling unless they got hit in the process, so you always had to bait them into an attack, wasting their preciously short lifespan. The puppet AI clearly needed some fixing. I mean, these guys lived only to stand there and do nothing. Kind of relatable, actually. Continuing with other unpolished features, since the game wasn't fully out yet, there were lots of minor details that needed some coding adjustments. And I'm talking about visual or gameplay bugs. For example, menus blinking, enemies got stuck in a terrain very often, this Ashina soldier got caught on the railing of the bridge every time I aggroed him, you could open chests that were already open, the combat music sometimes kept playing even after you rested at an idol and everyone reset. Some of the morally broken Ashina soldiers, well, let's just say Genichiro really missed an opportunity here. He didn't have to fight Wolf to get to Kuro, only ask this guy for the Dragon Heritage. Another feature that completely broke some combats is that after reviving, you could backstab a lot of enemies, and the only requirement to do this is to be fighting a normal enemy. It couldn't be a mini or a main boss, obviously. But still, as a beginner, even the normal Ministry ninjas can give you trouble. Being able to simply deplete your health, wait for him to turn around, revive, and insta-kill him is a big deal. Tactical resurrection was actually a thing. It would even give more utility to the bite down an item. Now, let's switch from gameplay to lore differences for a minute. The story wasn't different, but many names were slightly changed. From pacifying agents to fearlessness powder, maybe they didn't want to make it too obvious that it counters terror? Or perhaps it's because pacifying agent sounds cooler. Mibu Possession Balloon instead of Mibu Balloon of Possession, maybe to follow the same name structure of the other balloons, from Red Lump to Red Soulstone, Crybaby instead of Malcontent, and objects were not the only ones. Many bosses were kind of renamed, from Gyobu Oniwa to Gyobu the Demon. Funny that he's called like that, since in the endgame you end up fighting another demon in the same arena. The son of the armored knight was baptized 3 times. The firecrackers are called Robatos crackers. As the knight falls, he screams, "Roberto!" but the subtitles say Robert. Genichiro Ashina with Tomoe in between brackets instead of Way of Tomoe. Ishin Ashina with Saint in between brackets instead of Sword Saint. Emma Jukin instead of Emma the Gentle Blade. And the ape was always called Guardian Ape instead of Headless Ape in its second encounter inside the cave. Even its remnant is called Ape Couple instead of Headless Ape. Did you know that they left some precious bait, by the way? I guess the devs removed this, since you're probably a long way before Fountainhead Palace, and the item could cause some confusion. Plus, it's a clear sign that the rejuvenating waters cause this parasitic state, since the water in the ape's hole comes from the palace. Miyazaki saw lore clarity and said, absolutely not. One thing that bothered me was that the archers from Hirate always parried you if you tried to approach them with a charged R1. It was very annoying because what many people do in those fights where there is a mixture of melee and ranged enemies is to go first for the ranged guys. I run around and charge an R1 to get to them quicker, but there was always a deflection waiting for me, which gave time for the other enemies pursuing me to catch up. And now I have to deal with the archer while other archers were shooting at me and melee enemies were right behind me. Logically, it doesn't make much sense either. Why is a raggedy, starving archer thief capable of deflecting the best shinobi in the whole continent like this? This dude barely knows how to hold a blade. If I had to mention some more technical features about the game that needed improving, I would say be careful with not giving enough time for enemies to respawn, or else they can look extra deceptive. 30 frames per second can really throw your posture off balance. Pop-ups happened from time to time. For instance, look at the ministry guys just materializing out of nowhere. Here, Emma had already given me the cure for dragon rot, and Wolf would still ask for a sample of Fujioka's blood, as if he hadn't received anything from Emma. And I'm sorry, but what is this dungeon idol image? It looks like someone stretched a JPEG until it cried. Back to gameplay mechanics, and that's where we'll stay for the rest of the video. You know that for the Dragon Homecoming ending, you had to give the rejuvenating child a persimmon to cure her from exhaustion? For some reason, the taro persimmon you received from Kotaro didn't work. Only regular persimmons did. Same fruit, same concept, different vibes apparently. I think they just forgot to include this item in the programming, and that's why nowadays you can do it. The Mist Raven was pretty bad. It was mainly an evasive tool because it didn't have the follow-up strike that gets us on the enemy space. Back then, you had to manually move Wolf and do a normal R1 attack, but depending on how agile the enemy is, they might have already turned around by that point. Even against lightning strikes, it was such a waste. All it did was absorb it, but Wolf wasn't capable of throwing it back, so you're pretty much throwing emblem spirits away for nothing because you get no stuns and no damage. The Kingfisher whistle did not affect Orin, even though she is an apparition type of enemy. When an enemy approached you, the idol used to fade away, which would force you to stand up instantly, even after resting. Fun fact, this was actually a technique speedrunners of the 1.0 version used to get up faster and be a few milliseconds ahead. Now, I've saved the best for last. The following is plain broken. The Headless Ape is a boss that suffered many changes. First of all, you couldn't pull out the centipede from it to cause massive posture damage. When you double pressed the trigger to do the pull towards you move, nothing happened. His screen didn't damage you back then. It simply caused a terror buildup. This may seem trivial, but pair this with how broken the Pacifying agent was back then, and you won't ever have to worry about this attack. The power of the Pacifying agent, Fearlessness power, wasn't its name. Fearless. Consuming it gave you complete immunity against terror-based attacks. No physical damage, plus no terror buildup, means you could just continue smacking the ape anytime he screams like nobody's business. The ape is the least of your problems when it comes to terror. The Headless, however, they can put up a fight. Unless you are in patch 1.0, where they only have one health bar and become completely trivial because of the Fearlessness powder. The only thing that could stop you is how you still take damage from its attacks, even with a perfect deflect if you're not using the confetti. Look at how I completely destroy this dude because I'm not even worried about the terror meter. And finally, many skills did not require spirit emblems. Combats were a little more entertaining because, to name one, you could aura farm anytime with Ashina Cross, since it was completely free. On the other hand, some were more expensive than they are now, for instance, One Mind, costing 4 spirit emblems instead of 3. Why would I quit this when Ichimonji Double was still free? I have no idea. It's sad because this way of thinking still plagues the game nowadays. The gadgets are 1,000 times more useful than 80% of the combat art. I would never spend 4 points for One Mind when I can throw 2 firecrackers for the same price and get many more free hits while they're stunned. What do you think about it? Did they do the right thing making combat arts cost more than 2 emblems? For both mortal draws? Sure. For the rest? I don't think so.
Oh, by the way, I think it goes without saying, but messages with the occasional specter showing you where to get a treasure, the gauntlets, the skins, and a repeat X boss fight whenever you want feature were all non-existent, since those were the supposed compensation for not giving the game its deserved DLC.
Since Fromsoftware's patch notes for release day updates are pretty much, we did some fixing and shit, you're welcome. That's why I have fun doing these videos. We tend to discover many things that simply aren't shown anywhere, small details. Be it this guy being a poison ninja instead of a shadow, or big stuff like the corrupt monk double death blow. Thank you for watching all the way here, comrades. If you're into videos mentioning the worst mistakes you can make in From Software games, rankings, or revisiting the day one versions of Soulsborne games, subscribe to the channel to stay up to date.
For my next video, as you requested, I'll be analyzing what's the most well-hidden boss among all From Software games. See you in a while, my friends.